Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. Hey Jason, I was doing box squats yesterday and an older guy came up to me to let me know that this exercise was hurting my back. I YouTubed it and some other old guy was saying the same thing. I'd really like to hear your take on that. Thanks. Well, let me ask you a question. By many people's standards, I'm an old guy. I do heavy box squats twice a week. If I thought that they were dangerous for my back, do you think I would do them? Obviously not. So let's come over to the point. The first question I would ask you, though, is, did he tell you that the way you were doing them was an issue, or that the exercise in general is risky for the lower back? Now, if he said the exercise itself of box squatting is dangerous for your lower back, he's a moron. If you were doing them incorrectly and he said the way that you are doing them will hurt your back, he might be right, in which case he's a smart guy. Are you plopping onto the box? In other words, are you sitting on the box on control, or are you plopping? Because if you're sitting back and you have a large point of contact and you're braced correctly and you have control as you sit back completely onto the box, come to a dead stop, and then you explode, that's actually in some ways safer on your lower back than some forms of normal free squatting is. The reason is you're forced to use a slightly lighter weight. If you are box squatting to proper depth, you are not going to be able to use quite the same weight, and it's going to force you into a proper pelvic tilt position. What you're worried about is a bounce, like a compressive bounce when you hit the box. So are you sitting back onto the box correctly, or are you plopping onto the box? And I'm not talking about when you miss a 1 rep max. I'm talking about in your normal reps, including training maxes. Right? There's a difference between the two. Plopping onto the box is dangerous. Right? Plopping onto the box is dangerous because you have your spine loaded. But if you're sitting back correctly on a nice deep box, then it's fine. Now, a lot of guys who do the high boxes up on a bench, they plop almost always because they're using a weight that's heavier than they can squat. In other words, when you go to a 12-inch box, you're probably using less than you can actually squat. Right, so there's less stress on the spine. The guys who are using an 18-inch box or a bench, they're usually using more weight than they could even squat for a 1 rep max. And they tend to hit the bench hard because they're loading it with more weight than they could actually really control. So they tend to plop more and they have extra weight. That's different. If you're controlling it and sitting back correctly on a low box, it's very, very safe for your lower back and arguably less strain on it than a normal squat. So it really depends. Depends on what you're doing. What you're calling a box squat might not be a proper box squat. And that's what you have to assess with that. But if he's saying the exercise in general is dangerous, he's a moron, you can ignore him. All right, next question. Despite working on grip training and not using straps for my pulling exercises, rows and deadlifts, I still struggle to get my forearms to a respectable size. I have very thin wrists and was wondering if you have any further recommendations on how to bring them up. They lag behind the rest of my body significantly, and it seems like you've got pretty good forearms. Thanks for the great informative content, brother. Well, my first question would be, how much weight are you using on the rows and the deadlifts? In other words, what you think is a disproportionately small forearm might not be. You've got to keep in mind, like you'll see my forearms, well, he's got pretty big forearms. I'm also 220 pounds. Right? You also know that I can do rep work with over 500 on the deadlift. You've seen me do weighted pull-ups with 90 and 100 pounds. Okay? How much weight are you actually pulling with those forearms? Now, I would say you could do extra work, extra rows, some extra hammer curls. Do all that. Do some more loaded carries. That would probably help. That would all help. But the question I would ask you is, are you sure they're disproportionately small? Make sure of that. I mean, if you're still a noob lifter, like if your max deadlift is 405, and you have a proportionate row strength to go with that, then the issue is that you're just not big enough and strong enough, and they will catch up as you get stronger. If those things are better and they're still lagging, then by all means do some hammer curls, do some reverse curls, start doing some more loaded carries, do some extra grip work. What I wouldn't recommend though is you sit around doing bunches and bunches of wrist curls, because that doesn't improve your grip. Yes, it'll make your forearms bigger, but it'll make your hands bigger and everything else. And if that's not your goal, like I assume you want bigger forearms because you want to look a certain way. Well, bigger hands may not be what you want to go with that. That's up to you. I mean, that's up to you. But forearm curls will not improve your grip strength further. And that's been noted by many strength and conditioning coaches. They're purely an aesthetics thing. I would much rather see you do more grip training and maybe some hammer curls or reverse curls or something like that to bring those up. But keep in mind, everything you do, if you're doing big movements all the time, you're always going to get forearm work. Overhead pressing, bench pressing, rows, pull-ups, all these things train your forearms. As you get bigger and stronger overall, if you're doing all these lifts raw, your forearms are going to continue to grow. They're going to continue to grow. But if you really feel that they're lagging that much, do some extra hammer curls, some extra reverse curls, and you'll probably see improvements. It's up to you as to if it's worth it to you or not. But keep in mind, you might be talking about relative development. Keep in mind, I've been able to rep over 500 on the deadlift for many, 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 many years. That matters on my forearm size, because I actually have small wrist bones and stuff also. All right, next question and last question of the week. Jason, let's say you add the power clean as a 6 strength standard. What weight would you set? I wouldn't. Let's come back over. What does the Big 5 strength standard represent? It represents 5 lifts that when combined together work every muscle in your body effectively, and if you reach those basic strength numbers, you're probably going to be relatively jacked. You're going to look like you lift top to bottom walking down the street to the average person. If every muscle in there is already accounted for, pretty much every muscle in your body is accounted for with those 5 lifts, what do you think? Why would you add a 6th lift to that standard? People say, well, I just want a good strength standard. But that's not a strength standard. That's a size standard. Okay? That's a size and a body composition standard that I'm using strength to scale with. See the issue there with adding a 6th lift, particularly a skill-based lift? Is the power clean a true test of strength? No. The power clean is more affected by genetics than most other lifts are. It's also more affected by technique than any other lift in the standard is. All right, I want you to think about that. You want to add a 6th lift that's just basically a test of your hypertrophy and your body composition when combined together as a matrix of 5 lifts in conjunction. Okay? You're wanting to add another lift that measures your technical skill and your genetics. That doesn't even work into the strength standard equation. Now, if you just want to know how your power clean stacks up, go to any of the strength conditioning charts. But the power clean is not a good test of hypertrophy and body composition. It's a good test of your combined pulling strength relative to your genetic predisposition and how much of your explosiveness you've developed. It's also a good test of your technical skill on the power clean. It's a very technical lift. Very technical lift. So I don't think it works at all. It doesn't work at all for this. It exists in strength and conditioning charts because tons of strength and conditioning coaches use it. Because the power clean is assessed by many knowledgeable coaches to assess the genetic potential relative to the strength of, say, a football player, that you can take something like the power clean and their vertical jump and know everything you need to know about their athletic ability off those 2 lifts. You can basically look at an athlete, their body weight, look at their power clean and their vertical. And that will tell you enormous details about the genetics of an athlete. Right? That's what it will tell you. For our purposes, for our standards, this isn't particularly useful for the Big 5 strength standard. But if you want to know how you stack up, go look at the charts. But if you stack up really badly and you've been practicing the power clean, it just tells you that you're not genetically gifted. You're not a genetically gifted athlete. That's what it'll tell you. Tell you whether you're genetically gifted or not, if you've mastered the technique decently. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.